Over the last several months, Winston comps have proved themselves as strong options in the current meta. Despite many predicting that Brawl and Double Shield will become the must-run meta comp, skill teams have proven that Winston-based dive comps still have good chances against those two comps. And one of the biggest reasons why Winston comps are so strong? Ultimates. Winston comps generally have the strongest roster of ults in the game, and in skilled hands, Winston comps can snowball fights for multiple fights straight and prevent the enemy from, well, even playing the game. I made this video as we've recently seen a dominating performance by the Boston Uprising over the Houston Outlaws, who were 9-1 in the regular season. And the biggest reason why Houston lost was because of Boston's insane ult usage. I will be using a lot of clips from the game in this video. In Winston comps, Ana is a must-have, but for a good reason. Nano is one of the strongest ults in the game and helps the team win fights while crippling the enemy's ability to respond. Aside from Ana, there aren't really any must picks, and while there is a variant that employs Moira instead of Ana in a Winston comp, we'll cover that in a later video. But certain picks can increase the comp's ult power even further. Zarya provides Grav, Brig provides a Rally, Sombra is one of the strongest ults in the game with EMP, and arguably the strongest ult in the game. And Genji's Dragon Blade and Echo's Duplicate might not be consistent win conditions on their own, but they're great when combined with another ult to confirm kills. And regardless of what your team picks, what is the secret to taking advantage of all this power? Ult cycling. But what does that mean exactly? To explain ult cycling, we must first classify ults into two categories, opening ults and closing ults. Opening ults are ults that allow you to initiate a fight. They're either good at making space, such as Nano or Primal, or they are powerful enough to demand the enemy to respond immediately, such as Grav or EMP. Meanwhile, closing ults are ults that don't necessarily allow you to initiate a fight, but they're very good in closing out a fight. Basically, every ult that isn't an opening ult can be used as a closing ult, but how they close fights out varies. Damage ults like Pulse Bomb and Dragon Blade can quickly secure kills and confirm the fight. Sustain ults like Rally, Beat, and Valk that allow the more squishy heroes on your team to survive for longer won't close out a fight immediately, but can push you over the edge and bait out a lot of enemy ults. Mid-fight ults like Self-Destruct, Blossom, and Bob don't get much value until late into the fight, but once you are late into the fight, once the enemy has used a lot of their cooldowns, they can absolutely tear apart a team. And of course, there's a wild card of Duplicate that can act as any of these three roles, or even an opening ult if the enemy is playing the corresponding hero. So knowing all this, how do we cycle ults properly? Ult cycling essentially means that you're using as few opening ults as possible per fight, so you have at least one opening ult for the next fight. Ideally, you only want to be using one opening ult per fight if possible, but in any case, unless you only have one opening ult, don't use all of them unless you absolutely have to. Closing ults are there for you to help close out fights, so use them if you're having trouble closing the fight out. Don't be that team that chucks in Nano, Primal, Grav, and EMP in one fight, but if it is the last fight, obviously feel free to all press Q. When you follow these three rules to the T, you essentially create a cycle where you use one opening ult to win each fight, so that the next fight you have an opening ult or are close to building one. For example, the first fight you might Nano Winston and confirm the fight with your Echo duplicating their Winston. And the next fight you use Primal, but since Primal is the weakest of all the opening ults, you have to use two closing ults, Rally in a late fight Self-Destruct to win the fight. And then the next fight you grab Pulse to get multiple kills. Repeat the cycle and the enemy won't even be able to play the game. Note that it is common when Winstons are close to Primal for them to receive Nano so that they can jump in and build Primal to win the fight. This is fine if you have other opening ults, but if Nano and Primal are your only opening ults, avoid combining them unless absolutely necessary. Because of this, it's very common to see this combo in Double Bubble, Winston Zarya, like those types of comps, where you have Grav to win the next fight, or comps with Sombra where you have EMP to fall back to. It's also important to understand the role of each closing ult in your comp. You want to use damage ults like Blade and Pulse Bomb early into the fight to secure early kills, but sustained and mid-fight ults are best used later into the fight. Also, since her ult will take time to build, like her duplicated ult, make sure to use Duplicate early into the fight. Also, you might want to play towards strong combos of opening and closing ults. Obvious examples are Nano Blade, Grav Pulse, and EMP Bomb, but there are two less obvious examples that have been proven to work in professional play. Nano or Primal Winston combined with Echo Duplicate works very well, as Winston buys time for Echo to build ult in her dupe form. And really, any opening ult works well with Rally, because while Rally isn't that good during poke phases, when your team is aggressively engaging and brawling the enemy, Rally will push your team over the edge and win the fight. As a default option, Rally makes a great closing ult. Finally, you want to plan out the damage ults and sustain ults that you'll use, but you'll only want to use mid-fight ults once you see an opportunity, whether the enemy is out of position, they've used a lot of cooldowns, or you need it to secure kills. It might be helpful to go over an example. Here, the Boston Uprising are playing a Cyber Dive comp, which incorporates Genji and Sombra into a traditional Winston dive core, providing two very powerful DPS ults. This comp can open fights with either Nano, Prime, or EMP, and in terms of closing ults, it has one in each of the three categories we've talked about. It has Dragon Blade for raw damage, has Rally for sustain, has Diva Bomb as a mid-fight finisher. Let's actually watch Boston cycle their ults well with an example from the actual game. Here, Boston are playing against the Houston Outlaws, who have won the first few fights during a round of Ilia's Ruins. But let's see Boston turn it around with some good ult usage.
But they don't have the
Here,
nano, so
Boston used EMP to open the fight, followed by a Blade.
Yeah.
Since Houston are responding with their own ults and have the advantage of being on defense, Boston will have to use Rally to close out the fight. But critically, Boston saved their primal for the next fight.
I suppose, of what was opening things up for you, and now we're Piggy going.
You can see they win the fight and they have primal and also Diva Bomb for the next fight. Now, let's look at the next fight.
Slime just all over
Boston will open the next fight with Primal.
That's no amplification matrix.
And Punk uses self-destruct, but gets no kills as it was just a rematch. Despite this, the Primal is enough to make space for Boston's DPS to follow up, and they critically save Nano for the next fight, despite losing Iron 37 at the start. If it had been necessary, they could have used Blade to confirm the fight, but they don't need to, and they have a great Nano Blade combo for the next fight. As Boston approaches 100% capture, Boston uses Nano Blade. Valentine secures 2 kills before Boston will have to use Rally to confirm the fight, because Houston used ults to kill Valentine. And then finally a finishing EMP from Iron 37 puts Boston at the finish line. The first takeaway we can see from those clips is that Boston uses only one opening ult per fight, except a cheeky EMP at the end, but it was the last fight. Being economical with opening ults allows Boston to always engage first, and prevent Houston from using their ults to attack. During the second fight, we saw Boston save Nano, even though it would have been very tempting to pop it. It was a 5v6 after all. Punk used self-destruct just to remech, not the ideal usage, but they recognized that they were already engaging in a great position with a lot of flanks and high ground to use, and they were already set up in those positions, so they could finish the fight without checking in any more ults. And finally, they understood how to use their closing ults well. They timed them well, using Blade, which is a damage ult earlier, while using Rally, which is a sustain ult later into the fight. During the first fight, instead of using Primal to confirm the fight, they used Rally instead, allowing them to save that precious opener for the next fight. And finally, they weren't afraid to use their closing ults. And like opening ults, feel free to use all your closing ults if you absolutely need to. It's better to waste closing ults than it is to waste opening ults and break the cycle. Many teams make the mistake of throwing opening ults into lost team fights, believing the fight to be winnable. There are times where throwing Nano, Grav, and Primal into the fight won't even save it, and you have to recognize when it is better to save those ults for the next fight. Desperate opening ults only prolong your suffering, cut your losses, and get more team fights. So right here in this Field versus Shock match, Toyobin gets picked off. Instead of resetting and cutting their losses, they open the fight by high noon in the air and popping Nano onto... Let's see it. They pop Nano onto... Rig of all players, who predictably does nothing even with Rally. And yes, they pop the Rally as well.
The ultimate's being used here, the Rally, the Nano, everything being utilised. Let's just back off. They just back away from this. And
despite losing Violet, they decided to pop Primal, and since it was desperate, barely got anything done. As you can see, they will now have Smurf going in, popping Primal.
Taken out of the fight momentarily, maybe turnable now with Twilight getting that kill. I believe they
And
converted into the
what
shield
do you
bash
do?
as
Not a
well.
lot.
The bashing
And
field
to
down
top
to
it
the
all
low
off,
ground,
their
but the rally
main
armor still
damage
going to be doing a
dealer
ton of
in
work down the
Violet is
ground.
dead,
Hanbin
and
going
with
to be
low
down
Zarya
there to
energy,
try and keep
Toryobin
him
pops
alive in this
Graph,
fight.
and
Striker
worst of all,
cannot follow
look,
up. It's
Striker's
chaos.
even in position to grab Pulse. They not only wasted a minute doing nothing, as they got no ticks out of it, but they hosed their own economy in the process. Now, what happens if you've broken the cycle? Your team becomes careless, like the Shock earlier, and uses all their opening ults in one fight while screaming "winnable" into voice comms. It happens even to the best of us. Well, you have two main options. You might decide to play slow next fight to build an opening ult, especially when you are close to one. For example, you might be 80% to nano. Make sure you can actually play slow though. If the enemy has a lot of ults, this might not be the best option, because, well, they can just run into you while you're trying to play slow, and it can force the tempo. However, on attack, we can generally choose when to take the fight. It's better because it's like you can play slow. The enemy probably won't force fight onto you because they're on defense, and it is very common for attackers to play to build opening ults before engaging. You might also decide to make a risky play, or like you might decide alternatively, instead of playing slow, you might want to make a risky play and try to win the fight off of that. Either using ults like Pulse Bomb or Blade to cheese kills, or you go for like risky plays, like neutral plays, like flank auto-nades. This option is best on defense, where your team can set up good initial positions, and when you're far from building an opening ult. So now, let's see each of these options in action. Here, Boston don't have opening ults yet, but they are about 80% to primal, only 25 to nano. They decide to play slow, with Stan 1 walking into the enemy front line, not because he wants to dive the Orisa, but to farm primal. Once Stan 1 is close to primal, he jumps in and a bit more zapping brings him to the opening ult he needs. Since Myeonbong died, Faith pops a Rally to secure the fight, and Rally is a good fight closer with any opening ult, as we said earlier.
And Stanwell's got the support of his team.
And in this fight, Boston have no opening ults, but a combination of self-destruct, Pulse Bomb, and cheeky nade from Myeonbong wins them the fight.